This week on Forever Spinning, we tackle one of the greatest rock and roll albums of all time, Led Zeppelin II by Led Zeppelin. Following hot off the trails of their debut LP, Led Zeppelin was busy to say the least. Between demands of new material from Atlantic and constantly touring, the band did not have enough downtime to sit and write a proper album. So, instead of taking a break, the band decided to write in whatever free time they could possibly find. During their 4 European tours and 3 United States tours, all throughout January to August of 1969 is when they were able to write and record much of the music that is found on Zeppelin II. Nothing was easy for the group at that time either, as they were constantly moving around, touring, unable to find studio time, as well as other extracurricular activities that got involved as well. There was so much going on at once, and the band truly had to compromise during the recording sessions. For instance, John Bonham had to play the drum part of Ramble On a guitar case, a trash can, or even a drum stool. Nobody's exactly sure for certain. Many other obstacles came in the way of creating this album, and while most bands would have quit, Led Zeppelin never let their guard down and continued to create music. Instead, they channeled this chaos and were using it to their benefit in order to create a better album, which, in my opinion, they did. To me, Zeppelin II is one of the greatest Zeppelin albums of all time, if not the greatest Zeppelin album of all time, and this was released on October 22nd, 1969. The only official single to come out of Zeppelin II is Whole Lotta Love, which was released in 1997. The track is one of the most sexually implicit that Zeppelin has ever put out, taking a lot of ideas from Willie Dixon's You Need Love, which would actually later be recorded by Muddy Waters. A few years after Whole Lotta Love's release, they were then sued by Dixon and were forced to put his name in the credits as well as giving him cash. Deservingly so. And the original single was actually much shorter than the album version, actually clocking in around 2 minutes shorter than the original, and this one completely against the band's wishes. The band did not want to release 45s, but Atlantic went behind their back anyway and did so. The release of the single would actually bring this track into the charts very highly, however, it was still against the band's wishes. Zeppelin would actually go back and play this song almost every single night at their gigs, and would usually use this song to be the ending one. They did this for about 3 to 4 years until they moved on to other material. The next track I want to talk about is Ramble On. This song takes heavy reference and influence from J.R.R. Tolkien's The Lord of the Rings series. This song talks about wanting to achieve a hard-to-obtain goal while still continuously carrying on the journey, or rambling on the journey, until you're able to achieve that goal. This is in direct reference to the Lord of the Rings series, as the plot revolves around an obstacle-ridden challenge, as in destroying the One Ring. Zeppelin also faced their own challenges, as continually touring and putting on these huge, ambitious shows every single night. For both the characters in the Lord of the Rings and Led Zeppelin themselves, they were both growing weary and were tired, but still had to carry on the journey. And that's basically just what this song is about. It is one of the most popular tracks that Led Zeppelin has ever put out, as well as one of the most memorable tracks. Despite all this, it was never performed live in full until 2007, nearly 40 years after the release of the track. The last track that I'm going to be talking to you about today, as well as the penultimate track on the album itself, is Moby Dick. Moby Dick, which was originally titled Pat's Delight, is more or less a showcase of John Bonham's brilliant work on the drums. However, it is not a continuous solo. Jimmy Page would find himself in the studio watching John Bonham do his own thing, creating drum loops all the time, and eventually got to the point where he just began recording all of these different sessions that Bonham had. And when the time came to it, Page would actually take all of these recordings, stitch them together, and create the track Moby Dick. Despite sounding like a solo, it isn't necessarily a solo, considering the fact that it's taken from different recordings and being put together. With that being said, the song is still absolutely brilliant and one of the best tracks off the entire album itself, even though it is only an instrumental. The guitar and bass over top of the drums in the beginning of the track are amazing, simple chord progressions that would later turn into what the drums were all about to begin with, and just cascading into one of the greatest drum solos on an album ever, in my opinion. I'm not sure if Zeppelin II is my favorite Zeppelin album. It's always so close to me between 2, 4, and Houses of the Holy. Because to me, Zeppelin was able to pick apart and perfect different types of rock music in each of those albums. In 2, they perfected the blues. Or as Rolling Stone would continually write in their terrible reviews for Led Zeppelin, it sounded like white man blues. However, that doesn't make this album bad in any way. There are classics on this thing through and through that have stood the test of time and still hold up today. And there are many people that will find this album and will say to themselves, how have I never heard this before? Even the tracks that I didn't talk about, whether it be Thank You, The Lemon Song, Heartbreaker. All of these tracks are fantastic, and if you really think about it, and everything that I've mentioned so far throughout this episode, this was all created in spare time between 7 tours from January to August of 1969. Think about that time frame and think about what we were gifted with this LP. It is absolutely remarkable that this thing was able to come out in the first place 9 months after their debut and still create a splash and be one of the best rock and roll albums that has ever existed, period. There's no disputing that this album is a classic, as it is still regularly listened to by people nearly 50 years after its initial release. So for me, I always take Zeppelin II as one of the pillars of the most important and pivotal records that has ever been put out. Not necessarily as crucial as Zeppelin I per se, but overall a better record. But yeah, if you've never heard this album in full, it is totally worth a listen. You definitely need to do that. If you only know the tracks like Whole Lotta Love or Ramble On, you're losing out, because there is so much for this album to offer. Whether you've never heard this album before, or if it's a personal favorite of yours, Led Zeppelin II by Led Zeppelin will always be forever spinning. Happy listening.